Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Field Advisor podcast. I'm Kelsey Litchfield. Today, I'm joined by Logan Miller, who is a research specialist in weed science. And you have a colleague, Logan, that probably many people know, Dr. Aaron Hager, that you've worked with. And when I reached out to both of you, Dr. Hager said Logan is the expert on herbicides in early planted soybean. So you said you did your master's at University of Illinois. I'm curious why you've chosen this particular, project or theme within weed science.
Yeah, so I really fell in love with, I guess, the early plant soybean work based off my graduate studies that was funded by the Illinois Soybean Association. And I guess at the time I didn't know what it would lead to, but it's led to a whole different array of all these studies that I've just been really excited to do over the past few years, and they just keep expanding on each other. And so on this one in particular, the crop injury one is one that's really exciting too, that as we'll discuss here in a bit.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. So the research project title, which you alluded to, is funded by the Illinois Soybean Checkoff, is Injury Potential to Very Early Planted Soybean from Various Soil Residual Herbicides and Active Ingredients. A lot of people, a lot of farmers now are planting soybeans earlier than ever. Every year, I think it's earlier than in the past. So explain the project and why you think this research is important.
Yeah, so the original work that we did, it really just focused on one pre-herbicide. And so we wanted to expand on that because there were questions about um, particular active ingredients or premixes. Did they cause or more likely to cause injury? Since we only looked at a herbicide product called Boundary, and so it doesn't contain a PPO herbicide. So we wanted to look at that class of chemistry as well, and also just different premixes that are commercially available, and see if there was any concern, especially in that early soybean or plant soybean environment, when those beans are more likely to be exposed to less favorable conditions for early season growth, and see if that did cause maybe stand loss, maybe more injury, like necrosis in early in the year, and also possibly yield loss. And so we hope to gather all this data and eventually just have some solid recommendations to give to farmers when selecting a pre-herbicide for the next growing season, that they can be sure that what they're getting in terms of weed control and also the level of crop injury to expect as well.
So you said you tested it already once with just one herbicide. Where did that trial come from? Like, where did you get this idea? Was it just farmer feedback, or how did it come to be?
That's a good question. So yeah, the original work was just looking at boundary, and it was just focused on weed control that we did across central Illinois, but we hadn't looked at like actual crop injury, just that side of it, excluding the weed control aspect. And I think just I don't know, I just maybe one day I just sat down, I just came up with a bunch of premixes I thought would be cool to look at, and I came up with probably way too many. I think Dr. Hager trimmed the list down. But that's really how it started. I think that come up with about 10 to 15 that we could look at and see if there's anything of interest there is really, I think, how it began.
So you've been doing this project funded by the Checkoff for 2 years. So first, I want you to take me through the first year. Talk about, the methodology you used. Walk us kind of through that growing season, and then we can talk about what you found.
Yeah,
And
so
this would have been in 2024, correct?
yes, yep.
Yeah.
So we did attempt to establish it in 2023, but unfortunately the early planted beans got, I think they were planted like the first week of April, but they got like, I don't, not necessarily froze off, but hit pretty hard with the freeze. So that year got scrapped, unfortunately. But 2024 and 2025 we got 2 years of data at least. So in 24, the first successful year, and it's really the trial is set up as a split plot design. So we have it's a pretty big trial. So we have a levo component with and without, and then the two planting dates. So early versus a more conventional planting date, like a mid-May planting date, and then we have up to 16 pre-herbicides now in Champaign, including the non-treated. And so the reason we set up that way we did in the field is because, especially since we're looking at pre-herbicide injury, we couldn't really randomize those planting dates within each other. So that's why we separated them out, because if the early beans were up, we go and spray the May planted beans, probably get herbicide drift, knowing how windy it is in the spring all the time.
Yeah.
But so it's a pretty big trial. And so in 2024, what we found, I guess the major highlights were uh, we didn't see any, at least looking at soybean yield, we didn't see any yield loss from each individual pre-herbicide. They were all comparable. So that was a good thing to see. In terms of the planting date, I think that year it was pretty similar across the board, actually. Maybe it was slightly better in the early planted, but a lot of that had to do with the Olivo effect we saw that year, where the conventional plant, we saw 11 bushel yield loss when having that Olivo treatment versus not. And then the early planted timing or planting date, we didn't see any difference with or without that Olivo, even though we did see enhanced crop response from that Olivo treatment, regardless of planting date and stand loss. But it really showed up in that May planting date. I think the big reason we saw that in 2024 is because um, that May planting date had about 3.5 inches of rain within 10 days of planting or after planting, after those pre-herbicides went out, and that really caused a lot of stress on those beans that were trying to emerge compared to the early. I think it was like 1.5 inches of rain, so pretty manageable, and they did take a little bit longer to emerge, but again, just the sheer amount of rainfall that occurred in that later planting date resulted in just greater stand loss. And so that combined with the Levo effect, or the Levo causing stand loss, also was what resulted in greater yield loss in that May planting date.
So it sounds like it's all about the weather and remaining the most important factor when it comes to the study, which unfortunately is uncontrollable.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, I would definitely say it's a limiting factor. Yeah, it's because like not the I guess for 2025 we saw very little crop response in that May planting date, but the year before we saw more crop injury in that May planting date compared to the early. So it's just all depends on what that or a big factor I should say is what the amount of rainfall and when that rainfall occurs in relation to that planting date.
Not to put you at the spot, but I know I was at the same field day in Monmouth where you got maybe a little pushback about your study. Talk about that. Just how you as a researcher, you have these results. It's a third party research study. Talk about how you address some of the pushback maybe that you get from those results.
Yeah, yeah, I think the big thing is for us just to keep, doing the work and that the nice thing is we can uh do it multiple years and kind of show, it's not gonna be like every year, but we can definitely back up, the results that we found. And so I think that's the encouraging part about it is that, 1 year of data, you can question that, but when you do it multiple times, you can see, okay, it's happened multiple times. It wasn't just an outlier. And so, of course, this past year we didn't see yield loss from the levo treatment. And so I think again there's just a lot of variability that you can find with these studies, in agriculture, of course, especially when you're looking at yield. There's just so many factors that go into it. And so um it is it's it's tough also because um it's only one location. And so
Yeah.
in Champaign, it's not to say that, everybody who puts out levo treatment is going to see, yield loss. But I think it's something to keep in mind that it can happen. We're not saying it's going to be guaranteed. So I think that's also something we have to relay to folks and growers that um, it's not going to be just so black and white, everywhere. So
So 2024 was just one location in Champaign. Was it just like a regularly like conventional tilled field? Was it no till? What was some of the background on that?
yeah, so it was would have been a tillage environment or system where they ripped it in the fall, the corn stalks, and then we came back in the spring prior to planting, and then field cultivated it, and then planted into that. And then the pre-herbicides, I don't think I mentioned, but they were applied at planting. And so that also goes back to the original work we did a few years ago, where we did look at that delayed pre-application. We didn't see any benefit from weed control standpoint. So we've just stuck with applying all pre-herbicides at planting early plant soybean trials. That is going to change this year for some other studies we have. We're going to revisit that concept. But the other thing we have to keep in mind, of course, is that a lot of the products that we've looked at in this crop injury study do have label restrictions, so we can't apply them past 3 days or 2 days even after planting, depending on what the active ingredient is.
One thing that stood out to me while reading the report, and people can go to Field Advisor And then under the Discover tab, it's research. And then if you go to the past projects, since this one was funded, you can read the full report. But something that I highlighted in it was that soybean stand loss was greater in the conventional planting timing, which is opposite of what was expected. Differences in soybean injury and height were not present 28 days after emergence for all treatments. Walk us through your explanation there.
Yeah, so I think was that just 2024 you're referring
Yes,
to?
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah, so I think the story there was again that the amount of rainfall we received really caused higher levels of injury, crop response in that May planting day compared to April. We still saw crop injury across the board, but it was just those beans, just that amount of rainfall, they were under greater stress. And then as for the plant height, so the response of the soybean is going to show it's going to differ sometimes with these pre-herbicides. So sometimes it may be more of a chlorosis or necrosis effect, where we see some yellowing or even some darker lesions on the leaf, or maybe some even some speckling, depending on the herbicide, or bleaching effect. But the stunning, we didn't see it in 2024. Sometimes you'll see that with those PPO herbicides or even metribuzin, where they grow a little bit slower, maybe even end up being a growth stage behind. But why it occurs, one way or the other, I'm not really sure. I think it just has to do with maybe when that seedling is exposed to that pre-herbicide, or maybe the amount of it that it's exposed to. But yeah, we didn't see any differences in crop height at that assessment time of 28 days after emergence, even though we did see earlier varying levels of crop response. Um, but yeah, I think the biggest thing was just, in that April planting day, that those beans, they did take longer to emerge. I think it was about 15 days compared to the May was about 7 to 8 days. So that's another component, like, we think about, right, that maybe if there's a longer duration of time that they're exposed to these pre-herbicides, that injury will be greater. But that just wasn't the case in the first year of the study, which is kind of a surprise. But again, I think once you get, if you get 3+ inches of rainfall, that's just a lot of rain for those beans to handle. So I think that is really just was the biggest factor that year.
So you said, given that all the treatments recovered from injury by 28 days after emergence, and stand counts were overall greater than 100,000 plants per acre, the pre-herbicides evaluated caused little concern. Just kind of as a wrap up of that.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else to add?
No, I guess, well, I guess maybe one thing, so yeah, we're planning, I guess I forgot to mention too, the planting population we're planning as like 144,000 seeds per acre. So fairly standard, I think, for a lot of farmers, these days at least, maybe. But I think the thing I've heard is maybe some people are experimenting with is maybe lowering that soybean population, especially if they're planting early, they can still see as good a yields. And we've seen research in the past that, or not us personally, but there's been research done where that like optimum or agronomic optimum rate is like 100,000 seeds per acre, even less, maybe 70,000. So farmers, maybe even to cut expenses, right, could possibly reduce that seeding population or seeding rate. And so that's something we want to keep our eye on. If farmers are doing that, maybe we need to look at that too down the road. If they're planting maybe instead of 140,000 per acre, it could be more like 115, 120. But yeah, the population in 2024 really didn't give us any reason to be concerned just when solely looking at those individual pre-herbicides.
So let's now jump to 2025. Decide to do the study over again, but how was it different, if so?
I would say in Champaign it was definitely more boring, I guess in a good way. There was still crop response, but it was really just a couple of products that stood out in terms of crop injury. As for stand counts, they were beautiful. There's really nothing to be concerned about. So you can just see how important the weather was. It was different across the years and the role that it played. But Zidro Pro was one that stood out this past year. That you actually saw some stunting of those soybean plots. But they recovered and the stand was fine, like I mentioned. Then really the other ones that stood out were flumioxazin based products, so Fierce and Fierce or Kyber that are in this study, and they caused a little bit of crop response or more than relative to the non-treated. But overall, it was nothing like we saw the previous year in terms of that level of crop response. And then again, the yield, it did not differ between pre-herbicides, which is not a surprise given the stand count data that we collected. And then the levo effect, we didn't see, we actually kind of saw an opposite story. So the conventional plant, they were exactly the same. I think it was like 85 bushels to the acre. And then the early planted, we did see a 5 bushel increase by having the levo treatment compared to not. So take that for what it's worth, why that occurred. Again, we really didn't see much of a benefit though across when just looking at planting date. We still didn't see that much of a benefit by planting early in 2025 compared to and yeah, same as 2024.
And then you added a location in 2025, correct?
Yes, yep. So we took the trial over to our Perry location in Pike County, Western Illinois. Unfortunately, we only had space and probably time for the early planted, but we did get the early planted trial with and without levo in. And we did add a couple of treatments as well to that location since we did have enough space for that. But unfortunately, we were not able to yield that site because of red crown rot. Just took over, devastated the trial. It was unlike anything I've ever seen before. So that kind of ruined that, but we still got good early season data. And so what was interesting over there was that they were planted, I think it was March 26th of last year, and they came up on, I think it was like 26, 27 days later. So they almost sat in the ground a month before they emerged. And the planting population, or the stand counts, I should say, dropped about 30 to 35% from that initial planting population, regardless of what the pre-herbicide was. And so like at 28 days after emergence, we were getting stand counts of low 90s to about 110,000 soybean per acre. So that is one reason I do have a little bit of concern.
Why do you think that was?
I think it was just because they sat in the ground for so long. I think the germ just, even though they had that seed treatment, it kept, it declines. The longer I think they sit in the ground is going to keep getting worse. That'd be my best guess. But that is one, interesting. What's interesting about that is because if we do decide to plant, like if those beans were planted at 115,000 seeds per acre, then what would have that stand been at the end of the year, or 28 days after emergence would have been more like 50 to 70,000. Then maybe we could have seen yield loss if we were able to yield it. But that is something to keep in mind when planting early as well. So one other, I guess, to keep going, over there we did see crop injury differences. Again, the ones that stood out were those PPO herbicides, premixes, Fierce products, Authority products. Two products that really stood out, I would say, both years and also then at Perry, have been Preview and Prefix, and so they both have PPO herbicides. Prefix having Flexstar, Fomesifin, more thought of as a foliar herbicide in soybean, and then Preview does have sulfentrazone, which is in the Authority products, but those two, Preview and Prefix, have resulted in very little crop response, or really not any different than the non-treated. So that has been an interesting observation. And then at the Perry site, we also added metribuzin, dry metribuzin in at 10 2/3 ounces. So that's a really, I would call it a robust rate, especially for that soil type. It's 2% organic matter over there, 1.5 to 2.5%. And so, especially given that lighter soil over there, it's a medium textured soil, that is something we wanted to see what metribuzin looked like. And we saw really no crop injury at all from that higher rate of metribuzin. So that was interesting too.
So once again, the PPO-based herbicide premixes resulted in the most soybean injuries. So that's what you're finding.
Yeah, yep. It's not really a surprise, just given their tendency or track record, but it is interesting to see the differences between PPO herbicides. There's slight differences, but there are differences, which likely has to do with, I guess, the amount of actual PPO product in that premix. So, like for example, Authority Supreme has a higher rate of sulfentrazone, like pounds per gallon of sulfentrazone. Excuse me, I said that wrong. Authority Edge has a higher rate than Authority Supreme. I got it mixed up, but yeah. So that's some differences you'll see. Like Broadex has maybe a lower rate of sulfentrazone, but Authority First has a higher rate, so that it could be resulting in some of the differences we're seeing in the field between those PPO products.
So, with this information, and like I said, we will be printing the 2025 report here soon so that people can read it. But from 2024 to 2025, um, how do you think farmers should apply this information to their operation? Is there anything that they should do differently with this knowledge?
Uh, so it's a difficult question, I guess, to answer. In short, I think that so the whenever we think about like pre-herbicides, we have to keep in mind that also, what are they offering from a weed control standpoint? So it's kind of hard to ignore the other one without, we had to talk about them both. And so I think first and foremost, what are, target weed species in that field, which generally is going to be water hemp for most people, across the
So know
state.
so know what weed you're first battling, first of all,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
identify it.
Because I'm not going to call out certain products, but there's definitely ones I would say offer better control, residual control, in this study compared to others, especially for water hemp control. But that is something to keep in mind. And then, of course, what our soil type is. So we've only, done this or study in Champaign for 2 years and Perry last year. Hopefully, we do plan to do it again. Do one more year. And so there are, of course, different soil types all across the state. So that's something else to keep in mind. Maybe we'll see slightly different responses with these products. But I think the big thing is, aside from that weed control aspect, is we haven't seen any yield loss. So I'm not going to say it can't happen, but I think that's encouraging to see that. And unfortunately, the crop injury early on in the season is just something I think we're gonna have to live with. And that we have been honestly for several years now with those PPO products. But what was encouraging, I would say, is that metribuzin treatment. We've seen very little, and across other studies as well, very little crop response. And that's a really strong residual product that we can use in our soybean pre-program. And so that's also something to keep in mind as well.
So you mentioned wanting to do this study again. Is there any hopes of going other locations? Or I know there's a lot that goes into that decision, but thinking about year three, what would that look like for you?
Yeah, so we'll do it again in Champaign with the two playing dates and the Levo versus non-Levo, and all those same pre-herbicides again. So hopefully we'll have 3 good years of data, and then we'll go over to Pike County again, just the early playing date, is all we have space for again. But we'll do that again. Hopefully get it yielded this time. And then we don't really have anywhere else we can go. I mean, it would be interesting to see it on maybe a more heavy clay field, maybe somewhere in southern Illinois, but we just don't have the capability to do that at the moment.
Okay.
Um, but another, uh, I guess, something we did last year as well, but do it again this year is we want to look at it in a no-till environment as well, see if that heavy residue has any effect from that corn stalk residue on pre-herbicide injury and possibly yield. Then, so we did that in Champion last year. We plan to do that again this year. But other than that, I think that's probably the plan for this upcoming season.
I know, Logan, you've presented on this study at various field days. Like I said, I was at the Monmouth one. I think was it this past summer that you presented on. When you present on this study, what like farmer comments are you getting? Are you getting more questions about the study? What has made you think deeper based off of those presentations?
I think the biggest question that I get, or most frequent, I guess, is that what happens when we maybe, since we only looked at commercial premixes that are out there, what happens if you maybe mix some of them together, or if you take, say, a product like Authority Supreme that doesn't have metribuzin, you add in a high rate of metribuzin, what does that look like? Because they want to maybe again create a more robust pre-herbicide. So that's something I think we want to look at down the road is maybe just take a base of metribuzin at a high rate and just add in other high rates of herbicides, especially as soil applied resistance is becoming probably or is
Hmm.
more widespread than we realize. And so we're going to need more robust pre's. Then also on the back end, right, the foliar herbicides that we have are dwindling in their efficacy. So we're likely going to have to up those rates of pre-herbicide. So I think that is a concern that farmers have and that they have voiced to me to look at some more robust pre-herbicide combinations. I'm not saying these aren't all robust, but just even taking it to another level, I think.
Yeah, sure. Um, with this whole study, are you accomplishing the goal you set out to accomplish when you first started? Because I know it's been building on top of each other. But in your mind, has the study been a success for you, or has there been areas that you want to improve on?
I think it has, yeah. I think one, I guess, component of that's definitely made a success is that it's led to more studies, more questions. So I think that's a well-designed research project when you can build off of it down the road. But also, yeah, I think the findings have definitely been interesting. Like the levo aspect, I remember when I drove out the first day and saw the levo side of the trial and the non-levo, just it was a night and day difference, and I thought I did something wrong. Uh, just how bad the one
Oops, did
side
you
looked.
think that?
What was that?
I was gonna say, did you think oops, or maybe
Yeah,
another choice word?
yeah, but I honestly didn't expect, I mean, obviously we collected the data throughout the year, but I didn't expect that much of a difference in yield. Um, so that was really, I think, the biggest observation we made so far, but definitely it's fun to get out there and just see the differences in response from these pre-herbicides and um just in the different environments and across the different years, because it's not always the same.
Are you gonna push that planting date, the early one, any farther up? I know people are playing with the March time frame. Are you gonna stick to where you're at?
I'd like to get up in that first week of April here in Champaign. I know it's backfired before on me when I've tried to go too early because of the because of frost or whatever. It gets down to 24 degrees and they come up sooner than you think. That's what's surprising. That Perry they didn't last year, but they were also playing March 26th. But one year we played here in Champaign, I think it was March 29th, and they came up there in mid-April, and then they got froze off like a few days later, and I was just so disappointed. Uh, but but no, I mean, like even this study, we've been planting about April 15th both years, and then May 17th approximately for the conventional planting date, and really they only take about 14 to 15 days to emerge. And some, I would have thought maybe we've been closer to 3 weeks going into this study, so that's been also interesting to see. But yeah, hopefully, if things go well with the weather this spring, we can get in about April 5th to April 10th, so pushed up a little bit sooner for this study. Yeah.
I was gonna say it's all about the weather. Who knows what that's gonna bring?
Yeah.
Logan, some great information you've shared today. Is there anything we didn't cover about this study? And like I said, I know people can probably get a hold of you. They can go to Field Advisor, read the full reports, but anything we didn't touch upon?
I think, and it's a hard thing for a grower maybe to accept. I shouldn't say it's always going to be the case, but uh, that early season crop injury, if they, see it at first, I know it looks bad, but from what we've seen, when we're seeing 15 to 25, 30% injury and those beans recover just fine, I think the biggest thing is, do you have that stand out there? Because oftentimes you might do more harm than good if you go out there to replant or rip it up. And then how do you manage the weeds then, of course, after you've already put down a pre-herbicide initially. But yeah, I think if you have that good stand counts, I think from what we've seen, even though you may have that good or the higher levels of crop injury, at the moment, really no reason to be concerned about soybean yield loss. And so it's interesting because for years we used to, at least we used to really ding the beans with Cobra and Flexstar with our post herbicides. People are okay with doing that, but now, we see a little bit of crop injury early in the year, and we just can't live with that. But I think we're at a point where we don't really have an option, just given what water imp is doing, right? So it's
Yeah,
something we're just gonna have to live with, I'm afraid.
and continue to monitor and see what's next.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, Logan, we wish you a great planting season for your studies and trials. Anything else that you're focusing on this growing season not related to this study you'd like to mention?
Um.
You could mention the project we funded for 2026 if you'd like to.
Oh yeah. So our other ISA funded study, starting this upcoming year, or I guess it started last fall. It's
Yeah.
again, a plain day comparison study where we have early versus conventional, and then we're looking at really the same pre-herbicide, but we're looking at that post timing. Does that matter? An early post versus a mid post. Then we have that residual or no residual with that mid post component again. In this case, it'll be Zidua. And then we also have a rye, cereal rye component or a cover crop component to see, can we extend out that residual control essentially, or post timing with that rye component combined with the pre-herbicide, to extend out that post timing. So hopefully we can get better season-long control water hemp, because what we've seen in our other work is that we just have not been able to achieve season-long control water hemp when just having a standard pre-fall by post and a tillage system. So hopefully when we throw in or combine that rye with that pre-herbicide, we can get better control. So that's really the gist of the study. I'm really excited about that one, especially because it's a no-till study. We don't really do much no-till here, even though a lot of no-till in the state. And then also it will be a narrow row soybean study as well. So that'll be interesting to see 15-inch row beans and how that plays out in those two different planting dates and with that cover crop. And another aspect I would say, where that trial is located, just south of Champaign, we did a water hemp emergence study there last year where we had water hemp emerging on April 7th. And it was, I think it was 50% of the cumulative water hemp to emerge in that early. So it was another planting date trial, of course, early versus conventional, but the early planting date treatments, 50% of that water for those treatments emerged by the first week of May. And so what's interesting about that is in a no-till environment, you don't get the benefit of resetting that seed bank when you go through and make a tillage pass. So I'm really interested to see if, once we go out there and first see water hemp emerge there in April, most likely, in that no-till study, is it going to keep emerging? Is that going to be a problem for getting those herbicides incorporated in a timely fashion? Or will we see reduced control because of that? And so that's another interesting study or, factor to taking into consideration as well with that no-till study. But yeah, we got, on top of that, we got other studies just still looking at pretty much all of them are early versus conventional planted date studies, because it's nice to have that May planting date for comparison. And then looking at, we're expanding more to look at more pre-herbicides, and again, looking at different pre-timings to see if there is anything there, because farmers may be more inclined to delay that pre-herbicide when planting early, just because they have more flexibility, and why go out there April 5th and put it pre when you could delay it maybe 2 weeks later. So we want to see, again, across more herbicides, because in the past we just looked at one single herbicide. So we want to see if there is anything of interest there that could provide better control or worse control. But yeah, that's a lot of different studies that are involved.
Yeah, sounds like a busy summer, a good summer.
Yep.
Well, especially for the Illinois Soybean checkoff-funded project, we'll be posting updates on Field Advisor, so they can stay tuned for that. And then we'll come back with you maybe next winter and talk about what you found this upcoming growing season. So, sound good?
Nope, sounds great.
All right. Well, thanks, Logan, so much for coming on the Field Advisor podcast today.
No, thanks for the invite. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Field Advisor podcast. Unbiased, independent agronomy information to keep your farm moving forward. I'm Kelsey Litchfield, your voice from the field. This podcast is funded by the Illinois Soybean Association Checkoff Program. Stay connected with Field Advisor on social media. Follow, like, and share to keep the conversation going. And don't forget to subscribe to the Field Advisor podcast on your favorite podcast platform.